Hey to everyone, and welcome to our session on Rally with Resilience, bouncing forward from today's challenges. You might be intrigued now with the choice of title. Now, in this situation where we are now, perhaps we're so tired, no? Pagod na tayo nitong more than 1 year of quarantine, of COVID, pandemic. We're tired of getting scared, of being anxious, of staying at home. Okay, ano ba? Ano bang klaseng buhay to? How do we manage the situation? And so we would like to propose, okay, today on how we might manage, okay, our ability to bounce forward and move forward from where we are. Now we feel stuck. How do we move forward? So the original notion of resilience comes from the Latin word resilio, which means to jump back or bounce back. No? And this refers to people's recovery within the shortest possible time with minimal or no assistance at all. So, in the beginning, our understanding of resilience was being able to go back to where we were prior to, let's say, a disaster, a calamity, an emergency situation. It could be death in the family, etc. No? So resilience meant, okay, the ability to go back to your previous form. Okay, what we're saying now is that resilience should be viewed as the ability to bounce forward or move on following a disaster or adversity or pandemic like where we are in right now. And I borrow this from Mayena, who proposed this in 2009. So that we are no longer looking back and saying, I wish we were, only if, okay, ito na, this is our normal. And should we see the end of this pandemic in the next few months or years, that will be another normal situation. We cannot also go back to the pandemic times and say, mabuti pa nung pandemic, dot, dot, dot. Okay? So, resilience is also about embracing the moment where we are now and looking for the gifts, looking for whatever it is that we can use as opportunities, and also not only for ourselves, but also to reach out to others. Okay? So it is possible that growth in adversity during this pandemic is another way of understanding resilience, that despite or in spite of the restrictions of being locked in our homes or being constrained in our movements, that we will actually find growth in ourselves. And growth is not always about success out there or productivity or doing much more of what we think we are good at, but it can actually be a growth in our person, okay? In the way we, for example, deal with other people, the way we even deal with ourselves, and the way we look at the world in general. So I'd like to really bring our discussion to that direction. Okay. To make it a little bit simpler, okay, I'd like to borrow this infograph which actually summarizes, okay, para madali natin tandaan kung gusto natin mag-screenshot or you want to borrow this image that is actually in Twitter, in the Growth Mindset One Twitter link, no? And I find this helpful and also practical, even now during the pandemic, or more so now, because the truth of the matter is we didn't see this coming. What is so traumatic about disaster or pandemics is the fact that we didn't see it coming. If we knew it were coming and we could prepare, then the impact may not be as difficult or traumatic for us kasi alam nating darating eh. So, napapaghandaan natin. So, now that we are here, how do we cultivate resilience in ourselves now that we are in this pandemic? Okay? Hindi natin to napaghandaan, walang may kasalanan sa atin, kahit sabihin natin, kasi yung mga Chinese, sila nagsimula, no? There is no value in pointing fingers or blaming others for this or whatever situation, no? The challenge for us is how do we thrive and flourish during this difficult time, no? So for many of us who survived 1 year, we just don't want to survive, no? Yung phenomenon ng head above the water na parang makahinga lang. O nagawa na natin yun ng 1 taon. Ngayon, hindi lang natin gusto na makapag-survive tayo, no? Gusto rin natin we could thrive, we could grow, we could flourish. So, yun, no? It's not just bouncing back to where we were, but bouncing forward to a better version of me. Okay, and perhaps if we can do it to influence the family and the community to also be resilient families and resilient communities. Okay, so kung ano may mga aspects na to, no? Again, when we discuss, for example, these elements of resilience, we are not talking about, a hierarchy of what's more important. All of these interweave, okay, to build our resilience. So, ano tong mga to? Unang-una, siguro yung goal setting natin with realistic expectations, okay? Comparing ourselves to what we used to do or hypothesizing and guessing what we could have done kung hindi dahil sa pandemic doesn't help. Let us look at our situation and set our goals based on our reality, no? Our time zone, our space, limitations, the reality, for example, of no difference between home and work situation or home and school requirements kasi we're with our family 24/7. Kasama na yung mga house chores, errands, lahat. Magluluto, maglalaba, or kung ano pa man yun ay nangyayari habang tayo nag-aaral o nagtatrabaho. So how can we set realistic goals and expectations given the situation? Okay, so importante yan para we can find what is doable and we can also identify what is within our control and outside our control. So, goal setting with realistic expectations. Okay? And then we also have to mind the way we look at ourselves and value ourselves. No? So, pag pinag-usapan yung self-esteem, it is how we regard ourselves. Sometimes we are more aware of how we regard others, no? Sensitive tayo kung mataas o mababa ang tingin natin sa ibang tao. Pero minsan hindi natin tinitignan, paano ba ang pagtingin ko sa sarili ko? And sometimes we are not aware that we are our harshest critics, no? Parang mas malupit tayo sa sarili natin kaysa sa ibang tao. At mahilig tayo magbilang kung ano hindi natin nagagawa at yung mga pagkakamali. And sometimes that reflects also on the way we deal with other people, no? If we are critical with ourselves, we are normally critical with others as well. So let's start with that, no? How do I value myself? Okay. How do I appreciate also the things that I'm able to be and do right now? If I am able to be a good a daughter or son, or perhaps a considerate sister or brother, that's good. Let's give ourselves a pat on the shoulder. Okay? And then, of course, learning from mistakes. No? One of the hallmarks of resilience is not berating ourselves for our mistakes, but learning no matter how difficult it is. And athletes, this is something that they learn through sport also. Na for every defeat, for every failure, for every rejection, the the gift there is really what have I learned. And psychologists also notice that there's really more growth from adversity than it is from victory and triumphs. No? There is the potential of becoming a better person is there much more when we go through difficult times than when we are enjoying picture perfect lives. Okay, so that's important, no, to acknowledge that there's an invitation to learn. with every mistake or frustration or disappointment. And this whole pandemic is so frustrating. And perhaps it's time also for us to ask ourselves, why am I so frustrated? Why can't I progress? What am I doing that is causing me to stagnate in this pandemic? While there are many things beyond our control, there are things within our control, certainly. The way we use our time each day, the quality of effort we put, okay, when we are studying or working. These are things that are within our control. And then, of course, a real and truthful and honest understanding and acceptance of our own strengths and weaknesses now. Not before the pandemic, but right now. And a lot of people are discovering that for the first time in their lives, they are really making or that effort to look at themselves, no? Na sayot sa gusto nila, napipilitan sila mag-inventory, no, ng strengths and weaknesses. And that's a good sign also because sometimes we need to stop all of this activity to be able to get a good sensing, an honest and humble sensing of my strengths and weaknesses, no? At work, at home, in school, all right? And that's the time also that we can improve ourselves because we cannot improve ourselves if we cannot even understand where we are at the moment. And then self-regulation also requires self-control. While we are to be honest and authentic with our thoughts and feelings, acting on them is another story. Okay, acknowledging that I feel frustrated is okay, but to hurt someone or to throw a tantrum when we are conversing with someone um, is not necessarily helpful and productive. So self-regulation requires also the maturity to know when to control acting on our thoughts and emotions. That's different from acknowledging our thoughts and emotions, but acting on it is different. Say, for example, nakakainis, nakausap itong kaklase ko or kasama ko sa trabaho kasi paulit-ulit na lang mahilig mag-ranting. O, so, naiinis ako. Pero yung sabihin ko sa kanya na, alam mo, nakakapagod kang kausap, ayoko na ikaw kausap, or I'll start unfriending that person without talking to that person or communicating, is also going to trigger many more negative reactions. So, kailangan pag-isipan natin yung ating actions dun as a result of our thoughts and emotions. And then, while it is difficult, we need to summon also the willingness to overcome and go through difficulty rather than avoiding them. Mahirap talaga itong pinagdadaanan natin, but there's no other way out of this except through it. And there's value in going through adversity and difficulty. I'm not talking here about heinous crimes and let's say, difficulties brought about by injustice. Hindi ko yan pinag-uusapan. Pinag-uusapan natin is itong pandemic na to na although, of course, may efficiency ng mga people, ng mga tao, halimbawa sa leadership and those who are in positions of trust, that we need to also make a decision, especially if we're no longer minors, no, and children, that we will go through this rather than escaping, let's say, from by binging in Netflix. While there's nothing wrong with the watching Netflix, but to escape by doing that, or not doing work and just procrastinating forever, escapist behavior. Okay, so the willingness to face up to what's happening and to gather our strength is the challenge. And then to also check our thinking patterns, because ranting in social media seems to be very popular and acceptable, but it doesn't really help the person who's actually ranting and the public who is listening to that ranting. Okay, so we need to check the way we think and the way we express, okay, so that we will be able to see opportunities rather than problems. Now, we're not here condoning either what they call toxic positivity, where everything is positive. Hindi naman natin sinasabi yan because the reality is there are difficulties that we need to solve. So part of it is adopting a thinking that yes, we will find a way through this. Not that everything will work in our favor, but that we will be able to summon the strength and the ability to find solutions to our situation. And then seeking help and connecting to others is a very important component of resilience. In fact, in a lot of disasters and calamities and emergency situations, psychologists have also found out that the biggest protective and the most powerful protective factor is social connection. Okay, so even if help comes uh, a long time and other forms of needs may be curtailed, social connections, the ability to connect and seek help from each other is a very important component of resilience. So despite the social distance, let us keep connected to our close, trusted friends, family, okay, to extend help, to offer help, and at the same time, be willing to receive help, no? Sa ating mga Pilipino, parang mas madali to give help than to receive help kasi there's a pride involved, no, in receiving help. It is more fulfilling to say nakatulong ako kesa humihingi ako ng tulong. 'Di ba? Nandun na rin yung utang na loob, etc., etc. So, mahirap 'yan, no, para sa atin. And then the ability to recognize our emotions and those of others. Na marunong tayo magbasa nung nararamdaman natin at nakikita rin natin yung nararamdaman ng mga ibang tao. Even if we don't have that capacity yet to be mindful, no? The way people talk, yung pag-text nila, yung pag-pause, itong mga bagay na to are indicative of emotions. And then, to also hone our problem-solving skills. Na wag tayong to withdraw from the situation, but to stop and say, okay, what can be done? After complaining, which is not wrong in itself, now what can I do? So to activate problem-solving skills in ourselves, in the teams that we work with, in our families, is a very important component of resilience, of moving forward, of thriving under these circumstances. Okay? And as I mentioned a while ago, all of these are intertwined to each other, no? And you don't develop this overnight either. But while we are in quarantine, to understand that to be able to move forward, there are certain things we need to work in with ourselves. I hope that this discussion, which is summarized in this screen, would give us some pointers, on how we could move forward. Okay, so where do we go from here? All right, I'd like to borrow this quotation also from Vivian Komori, who said, "Life is not about how fast you run or how high you climb, but how well you bounce." Okay, from adversity. And so every time we feel down and that we are able to bounce forward and face another day and welcome the next task, for instance, is already a reason to celebrate. Okay, these little things are a reason to celebrate. Okay, and also, okay, from Charles Darwin, and this is a really, really years old thought also. It is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. And this COVID is a radical change in our lives. We know very well that many have fallen, great colleagues and strong colleagues also. But if we look at nature and the what lessons evolution has taught us, that the most likely to survive are those who are open and willing to change. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time with us, and I hope that this has helped you. Thank you. Maraming salamat.